You've changed. A call of mortality clouds your vision now. Be certain, Reaper, there will be no second chance.
We are talking Broken Swords, The Last in Line, also known as The Last in Line, a saga of broken swords. And this one is directed and co-written by Michael Babbitt. And this one clearly inspired by kind of the likes of Dungeons and Dragons. I actually initially thought it might be an adaptation of the PC game Broken Sword, but alas, there's nothing to do with that. So this is a low-budget indie fantasy movie with a contemporary original twist. So what is the plot here? It focuses on a group of 12 or so mercenaries, and these are kind of medieval warriors of different types. We have kind of warriors, archers, wizards, that sort of thing. All who are holed up in this barn, and they are surrounded by their enemies, who are various types of kind of medieval bad guys, I guess. Anyway, and literally the whole film takes place within this barn, and ultimately it details the kind of the squabbles and the interactions between all of these characters and their relationships to one another, and you know, a plot of how they may have come to be there that may involve mutiny and murder. So first of all, let's talk about what works with this movie. So this is an original idea in the fact that you don't really see many movies like this in this kind of fantasy setting. The only one I would compare this to is the recent movie Headhunter, which had a similar concept in the fact that it's more of a snapshot of the day-to-day life of this medieval character, and this is more or less that with a group of characters. You don't really see any of the action on either of the movies. It is just a dialogue-driven character piece. So that may put some people off, but I've got to say, if you don't have the budget to do a effects-laden movie, then obviously you had to find ways around this. And the idea here being that, you know, this clearly is a world where magic and kind of monsters and stuff exist, but there's simply no budget for that, so they're just going to have a character piece in this one essentially sequence of this movie where they are all holed up in this particular barn trying to figure out their next move, you know, on a kind of strategic basis. The movie also interestingly has takes itself very seriously in one hand, and I feel is definitely going to be made for those of you who enjoy playing Dungeons and Dragons and things like that. But it also has a very distinct style in the fact that the way the characters are portrayed, they are portrayed like modern military soldiers, American soldiers. So, for example, rather than kind of radios, obviously this is a medieval fantasy setting, they'll kind of talk to each other via kind of magical means, like a magical telepathy, so to speak. But they'll speak like modern, you see in films and TV, like modern kind of US military troops. They'll say stuff like "stay frosty" and that kind of stuff. So we have this very modern sort of dialects basically in this fantasy setting. Now, this being an American film, I guess they don't really have the medieval historic history there to kind of draw upon, so this is pure fantasy, and I guess it kind of makes sense to a certain degree that this is how they wanted to depict it, but I feel it may put some purists off. But nonetheless, it does have this makes it feel somewhat original, because you relate the kind of the way these guys are speaking to stuff you have seen, you know, Zero Dark 30, that kind of stuff, that kind of military speak that you would have heard in kind of modern cinema. I'll also say I think some of the kind of the costume designs here are quite impressive. We have a variety of different character classes, if you will, and some of them are, you know, they're all kind of like covered in dirt and blood and stuff like that. So it definitely has a kind of a worn, lived-in feel to it. So you can imagine they are just coming out from a battle. These are not any kind of like clean, pristine warriors. And there's some attention to detail here to make all of the kind of like the different classes look fairly distinct from one another. However, let's talk about maybe what doesn't work for me. Okay, so the movie takes the deliberate choice to have this one setting. However, this does not make a particularly visually interesting movie, despite the fact that I do like some of the costume design and maybe the set design here. The entire film is set in one wooden barn. So it really is not a visually interesting movie outside of the costumes, and there's a couple of visual effects that they use, but they're relatively not anything too special. So visually speaking, the movie isn't particularly interesting, and because it's all literally set in one location, it has the feel of more of a play compared to a film. It's certainly not a cinematic experience. And because it's a purely dialogue-driven movie, the movie, for it to work, would have to have great acting and great dialogue. And unfortunately, those two things are both lacking as well. So there are some good performances here. I feel that kind of the leader of this group does a pretty decent performance. Although, like I said, he does feel very like a contemporary kind of soldier. But I feel his acting was good in the part nonetheless. But some of the other parts here, I feel the performances are on the weaker side, and there's some real unconfident line deliveries where we have uncomfortable pauses. The line delivery seems a little weak and forced sometimes. I also think there is far too much time here spent on just people trying to act macho and kind of like seem like they're badass. It's like, okay, I don't need to spend the whole movie with people kind of hurling insults at each other, and it really just feels like there's no real dialogue here. It's just kind of like these characters trading insults for pretty much most of the movie, and delivered in a kind of a poor way in not appropriate dialects for the kind of the historical fantasy kind of setting that it's got. It makes for somewhat of a trying experience, to be honest, and the movie does become a little dull because of this. I also think there's maybe too many characters here. I mean, I think there's around 10 or 12 people here, and you don't really feel like you get to know the characters particularly well, or at least the majority of them. And when some of them die, there's supposed to be some emotional resonance here. But I feel the fact that there's too many characters that are poorly kind of drawn out with bad performances, you simply don't care. You are also kind of really just begging to see what's going on outside. And the movie does give you a couple of glimpses of what's outside the window, but any action is just like arrows flying through the window, and we just get an internal shot here. I compare this movie a lot to the movie Headhunter because it reminds me of it so much, but at least that had lots of external shots, and I feel it at least had variety in some of its kind of camera work here and the locations. And even though I felt that movie had its problems, and I know people like that film, but for me it was kind of it did have its issues, but it was at least it looked visually stimulating. This does not. And I feel it also suffers with some, like I said, poor acting and quite frankly, not interesting dialogue and too much kind of like macho posturing for its own good, and it just gets a little tiresome. So really, I can't really recommend this movie. I do feel that there's some merit in some original ideas here, and fair play for trying to make a movie within obviously a very limited budget. I do think there's some value for those of you who are really interested in kind of like the Dungeons and Dragons in real life, or that kind of stuff, maybe LARPing. But I feel for more general audiences, this will just be a little bit of a slog, and therefore I can't really recommend it outside of those kind of niche audiences. So I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.